In the big scheme of things here on the battlefield. Battle has now worked its way south, as Dr. Glenn Robertson, another one of the more prominent historians on Chickamauga, said the Battle of Chickamauga, the first day is basically like a large zipper being drawn together. And so we've now reached area where it's crossing now, the fighting has crossed over, it's crossing the Alexander Bridge Road and moving into the core, the center part of the battlefield. And by the late afternoon it will have reached the very south end of the battlefield. But at this point, with things changing, initially this battle starts out a clash that neither of the Army commanders really have a grasp on, just these men being brought in, slamming in. And Bragg at this point, who had been trying still that morning to keep his troops fixed on the south end of the battlefield near where the fords were, for those who were on our ford tour last night in that area, to go with his plan. Bragg's ultimate plan for this battle had been to move his forces through here, group of men together, and then launch an attack on the northern end of what he perceived to be the Union Army's flank at Lee and Gordon's Mill. But by that night, or last night 150 years ago, George Thomas brings part of his corps up here. They moving up here so the flank's no longer there. Bragg is not aware of that initially on the morning of the 19th. He's still holding on hopes to, as fighting starts flaring out up here, that he can still launch this maneuver. But now, with more and more troops being pulled into this fighting, he's finally going to have to start caving into the reality of what's going on. He's going to basically give command of the northern part of the field to General Leonidas Polk, his senior most subordinate, although I always feel funny saying subordinate when I mention Leonidas Polk because he's extremely insubordinate. But Polk will basically start exercising control of this part of the field, while Bragg will still try to figure out what's going on at this point, still not unsure of what needs to be done and what's developing up here. Well, Polk is now coming along with Polk is going to be the division of Benjamin Franklin Cheatham. Frank Cheatham commands the largest division in the Army of Tennessee, sometimes could even be called a demi-corps, as it consists of 5 brigades, all Tennesseans except for one, the newly added brigade of General John King Jackson. Now, John King Jackson, fitting in with my earlier description of guys who are difficult to get along with, and therefore, guess who he's friends with? Braxton Bragg. But John Jackson's brigade is going to form the right front brigade, or the northernmost brigade of Cheatham's division. And it's a brigade of Georgians and Mississippians. And they will be advancing through here. Cheatham's division front is going to be 3 brigades in front. You got King here. A little further down, you're going to have Otho Strahl's brigade, and then the southern brigade of the division is going to be General
Marcus Wright.
Yeah, Marcus Wright, later to be Carter's brigade later on.
Right.
Thinking in the 1864 right now for some reason. But they will make up the southern flank. But Strahl will be moving into the center, and then behind him will be in the 2 reserve brigades will be George Maney's brigade, following in basically right behind Jackson, and then in the center will be Preston Smith. So it's a pretty big block of Confederate troops moving in this direction. And they're going to be moving down the, forming up here, moving in, just as the troops that are driving back Liddell are starting to come in, that being principally, first of all, the brigade of Cruxton's brigade, who y'all heard about earlier with the talk of Brannan's fight in the beginning of the battle, and also now coming into action, Richard Johnson's division. Now, Johnson's division is advancing pretty much along the Lafayette Road coming in through here. But then south to him is going to come into action is going to be the division of John Palmer. So we're finally breaking that earlier trend of one division coming in, driving back a Confederate division coming in and driving back them. We're about now to come out to just a straight on, full frontal slugfest. And so right now we are going to emulate the initial advance of John King Jackson's Mississippians and Georgians. So we'll do this, go up here to the hilltop where they have their fight, we'll cover them and then what happens afterward to them before going into Bragg Field and talking about what had happened there. So before we leave here to begin to advance, anybody have a question about the overall tactical situation at this point? Yes, sir.
Which brigades primarily was Jackson facing?
Jackson's going to go head-to-head with the crazy Prussian August Willich. One of the most colorful personalities in the Union Army.
When and where did Cheatham come across the Chickamauga?
Cheatham had crossed over down at the fords, pulling in, and earlier in the morning it had been initially part of what Bragg was wanting to do with that block.
Today there.
Yeah.
From this way.
Yes.
South.
Yeah.
7 a.m. on the 19th, they crossed the
From the
ford
south. This is north.
at the south end of the battlefield. Yeah.
This way. That way. Down that way.
See, now we're all getting experience of why the generals couldn't have a good grasp of anything, because here in the woods you can't tell direction. You can't see what's going on. This is why this is the last place on the face of the earth the general would have chosen to have fought a battle. So anybody else got a question, or else we'll move on up here to the hill, the ridge top. All right.
Let's go see Mud Wall fight.
This deploying would have been Scoggins, Georgia Battery, known as the Church Bell Battery. You always hear those little stories about during the war, you know, the sacrifices that southern communities made for the war, such as sacrificing their church bells so they could be melted down. Well, this is the true case with Scoggins Battery. All of its guns were made of, had a peculiar dull grayish bronze color due to the lead content of the church bells. So again, John K. Jackson's brigade is going to move into action here, and in the words of one of the commanding officer of the 5th Georgia, from his official record report, Colonel Charles P. Daniel. We were posted on the left of the brigade and went into action about 1 p.m. Saturday the 19th. A few moments before this, I was informed by you we had a line of battle in front. We had not gone far before I discovered that you were mistaken, and that the enemy were immediately in front of us and had commenced firing. This confused my command considerably, but in a short time we continued to advance, driving the enemy before us for at least 3/4 of a mile. We had by this time expended all of our ammunition. They're going to advance driving Union troops, but this here is when they come into contact with the advance of Willich's brigade of Johnson's division. Now, August Willich mentioned to you that John K. Jackson was a Bragg man, pro-Bragg man. Well, August Willich is a very colorful character who devotes a little bit of our time now. Pictured here. August Willich, as you can tell by the name, to use a local colloquialism, ain't from around here. He is a Prussian immigrant to the United States, but what makes him most colorful is his background in Prussia. August Willich had been a officer in the Prussian army, and he was given a task in the mid-1840s to begin examining what they called dangerous literature, basically socialist or communist in nature. And he quickly discovered why it was so very dangerous. Because he read it and he agreed with it. And so in 1848, a series of revolutions sweep across Europe, including in the Germanic states. And Willich becomes a leader in this, commanding one of the what were called Freikorps, or within the command. Willich will lead one particular army where his adjutant will be Friedrich Engels of Engels and Marx fame. Needless to say, this revolution fails, although not before Willich becomes somewhat well known for his beliefs and also for the adoption of red flag to be with his command. And yes, that is where the whole notion of red flags and communism began, was with August Willich. He becomes nicknamed the reddest of the red. But exiled to England to begin with, he will have a big falling out with Marx because Marx considered Willich to be too idealistic. And also it doesn't help matters that when Willich would meet with Marx, he kept flirting with Marx's wife, and it led to a big blowout at one point where Marx will call Willich a twice-cockled jackass. So anyway, with that, Willich will then side with some others, will try to wrest the lead of the socialist communist movement away from Marx. They will fail, and Willich will come over to the United States and quickly becomes a German language newspaper editor, becomes pretty prominent within the American German community, and when the war comes out, he's a sought after commodity to rally the Germans to the cause in the North. And so initially helping recruit several of the Midwestern German regiments, he will get the colonelcy of the 32nd Indiana, which is part of his brigade here. And Willich is a very interesting combat officer in that he takes a European view of how combat is done and fights here at Chickamauga in a very unique way that is going to be felt by John K. Jackson, a movement that was called advanced firing. He would basically form his regiments into large blocks of four ranks deep rather than the regular two. And they would basically cycle from the front, four men, one behind the front. The front man would fire, he would then step out, move to the rear while the second man would step forward, fire, he would cycle to the rear, then the third man, and of course the idea is that by the time that first man had made it back to the front, his weapon is loaded and ready to be fired, and the whole time they're advancing. And so you keep a constant fire on the men in front of you. So Jackson's going to be on the receiving end of that. So when you hear about the level of fire that's being taken here, that's why it's being taken. It's because of the way Willich is fighting his command. So Jackson's men move on to the ridgetop here. Scoggins' Georgia battery unlimbers and goes into action. One of the gunners in that battery would later write, "I well recall the hasty orders for our company to take our battery into action. Let's see, jump into that. Yeah, here we go. At this point, the battery were a majority of the men and all the horses but one at one of our pieces had been shot down. And as the Yankees were then upon us, we were simply compelled to leave our church bell guns. The gunners spiked the gun and reluctantly left it behind. Our lines rallied in all about a half mile in the rear. So they're going to be driven by this intense fire from Willich to the rear, but not before he notes, a hail of Yankee bullets were flying around us, and in less than 10 minutes, one of our lieutenants and several of our men were carried off the battleground severely wounded and one or two others killed. One of these men walked a half mile back to the field hospital. So this battery's just going to be torn to shreds by all of this firing that's going on. The men are going to stand here, as I mentioned at the very beginning, until they begin to run low on ammunition. In the brigade, they're being pressed forward by all of Willich's regiments, and one of them being the 89th Illinois, known as the Railroad Regiment, because so many of the men had connections with the railroad. One of the captains in the regiment, John M. Fauquier, noted, "The head of the column swung in the right flank, and as each successive regiment came in, it prolonged the line and went to work. Johnson's division maneuvered like clockwork." When when the 1st Brigade came on the field, you had the 32nd Indiana, 49th Ohio formed the front line. The 89th Illinois and the 15th quickly took position in the second line again. Like the others, are fighting with that two regiments up and 2 regiments back. My skirmishers were soon engaged the enemy, who opened on us with shell and with canister from point right in front. So the 89th is advancing against the Church Bell battery over here. After being reinforced the skirmish line and having brought to bear 2 sections of my battery and having sufficiently shaken the enemy's infantry line, I ordered a bayonet charge and took the 89th Illinois into line with the 49th Ohio and the 32nd Indiana, keeping the 15th Ohio in reserve. Our line had only been formed a few minutes when the enemy opened on us with 6 pieces of artillery. There's only 4. And a crashing volley of musketry. Not a man within my view flinched. They were then ordered to lie down. We lay on the ground without firing, subject to heavy musketry and artillery fire of the enemy, which wounded 5 of our men. And then after this, they'll fire for a while. Then they advance using that advanced firing. And Jackson's brigade, at this point, having expended so much of its ammunition, is going to begin to fall back. We're going to move down just a short distance, so the next group coming up right in this area here, you're going to have continue part of Jackson's line. Just take a moment. One of the regiments just to the south of here, where our other group is at, is the 5th Georgia Infantry. 5th Georgia is a regiment known as the Pound Cake Regiment, had a heavy concentration of men from Augusta, Georgia, but also several companies scattered throughout the state, including a company out of Griffin, Georgia, known as the Griffin Light Infantry. But the most famous company being one of the Augusta companies, known as the Clinch Rifles. Started out the war in green uniforms, and there's quite a few photographs of some of the men of it. However, one of the most interesting photographs and one of the most tragic that I have ever seen is associated with the 5th Georgia. And that photo is of a group of men, a family that was serving in the Army, in the Griffith Light Infantry, and that is the Burris family pictured here. Father and 2 sons. Note, the one son here with the mustache had been the regiment's color bearer at the Battle of Stones River. In the state capitol in Atlanta, they have a large collection of battle flags, and the 5th Georgia's first national flag is on display there. And it's unique in that on the lower part there's 2 holes that go through the entire length of the flag. A piece of artillery shell had exploded in the air there. The shrapnel had went through the flag as they were advancing, and so you've just got that hole repeated multiple times throughout the flag. That same blast killed the young man here. The father had been the newspaper editor, a very outspoken secessionist in Griffin, Georgia. And so, although he had earlier retired, had got a discharge for reasons, because of his advanced age and his health, after the death of this son, he comes back. And he will be wounded here on this line right down through here. So, pretty little tragic story, the death of a son and now the maiming of the father in this engagement. But at this point, ammunition low, having just taken a brutal beating up here by Willich's brigade. Jackson's brigade at this point is going to be cycled out of action. They're about to be driven from the position, but at the same time they're going to begin their withdrawal back to the rear. At the same time, George Maney's brigade is now being ordered forward to replace them. And Maney's brigade is going to come into action up here. And of course, the actions of that command is going to be most famously remembered in the words of its most famous private, Sam Watkins. And Watkins' account here will, of course, lead to an interesting little story here. Our corps being in engagement, held in reserve, reader, blah, blah, blah. Let's get to this. It's going to be during this that this little line comes about. To see the couriers dashing backward and forward, to bear the orders given to the brigades, regiments, and companies, to see the forward in line of battle, the battle flags waving, to hear their charge, and then to hear the shock of battle, the shot and shell, all the while whizzing, zipping, and thudding, and the screaming and roaring, bursting and passing right over your heads, to see the litter corps bringing back the wounded continually, and hear them tell how their command was being cut to pieces, and that every man in the certain regiment was killed, and to see a cowardly colonel come dashing back, looking the very picture of terror and fear, exclaiming, "Oh men, men, for God's sake, go forward and help my men. They are being cut all to pieces. We can't hold our position. Oh, for God's sake, please go and help my command." Here some of our boys ask, "What regiment is that? What regiment is that?" He replies, "Such and such regiment." And then to hear some fellows ask, "Why ain't you with them?" Then you cowardly puppy, take off that coat and those chicken guts, coo, sheep, ba, ba, black sheep, flicker, flicker. Ain't you ashamed of yourself? Flicker, flicker. I've got a notion to take my gun and kill him. Every word is true, and it happened. But all that could demoralize, and I may say intimidate a soldier, was being enacted, and he not allowed to participate. How we were moved from one position to another, but always under fire, our nerves strung to their utmost tension, listening to the roar of battle in our immediate front, to hear it rage and then get dimmer until it seems to die out entirely. General Polk rides up and happened to stop in our front, and some of the boys hollowed out, "Say, General, what command is that which is engaged now?" And the General kind of observes, "That is Longstreet's Corps." Of course, that's not the case here. Again, Sam's memoir is to be taken with several large grains of salt at times. Turn to General Cheatham, he says, "General, move your division and attack at once. Everything is at once set in motion." And General Cheatham, to give the boys a good send-off, says, "Forward, boys, and give them hell." General Polk also says a good word, and then the word was, "Do as General Cheatham says, boys." Of course, remembering that General Polk was the Episcopal bishop. After marching a solid line, seesawing, right a blocking, left a blocking, guide center, and close up, commence firing, fire at will, charge and take their breastworks. Our pent-up nervousness and demoralization of all the day is suddenly gone. We raise one long, loud, cheering shout and charge right up to their breastworks. Of course, I wonder what he's talking about out here, because there are no breastworks. Again, grains of salt. They are pouring their deadly missiles into our advancing ranks and under their headlogs. Again, I think he's thinking a little forward in time. We do not stop to look back and to see who is killed and wounded, but press forward. They waver and break and run in every direction. So they'll drive up, but again, Sam's overly exaggerating, because Willich's brigade's going to reserve time here, and ultimately their fate is going to be the exact same fate as what had befallen John K. Jackson. Sadly, Sam is going to experience one of the most heartbreaking scenes of the whole war here, as one of his dearest friends, Billy Webster, is going to be killed in line very near him. And I think this will actually halt Sam for the rest of his life, for the simple fact that he will blame himself for Webster's death, as he had convinced Webster to enlist in this regiment early in the war. So you got to sometimes think about the mental baggage that some of these men are going to carry with them as the war goes on. And folks in the back can move up a little bit. We're at our other group. Passage of lines here.
Do you know anything about the vegetation patterns at the time and so on?
Would have been very open woods. Not much undergrowth here in 1863.
Well, you hadn't told about John K. Jackson's nickname. You hadn't told us anything about his nickname. How he come by that?
Not real sure how he came by it, but his nickname was Mudwall. But then again, there's couple other Jacksons. It seems like any Jackson who was not Stonewall was known as Mudwall during the course of the war. folks. We'll actually go ahead and make our way down the trail here into Brock Field, and we'll talk about town. That's basically what's going to happen. Manny is going to meet the same fate ultimately that Jackson does, except when Manny is pushed back, there are no longer any men to replace him. So the Union Willich's brigade is going to begin to press forward, and we'll press Manny back onto across the Brotherton Road until they run into artillery that has been deployed there. If they re-rally there, with the help of the artillery, they will stop the Union advance. But that ends the advance up here on this part of the field. All right, we'll move down. And we've now entered into the field. This is also just giving us a little bit of an appreciation for the front that Cheatham's division presented, because from here out through the field is going to be the length of Straw's brigade, and then beyond it, further even to the south, is going to be Marcus Wright's brigade. So pretty massive frontage of these two lines. But here in Brock Field itself, you're going to have one of those classic stumble in and meeting type of engagements. As this was going on, you've got Union troops advancing from the Lafayette Road this direction. You got Cheatham's men advancing, and both get here to the field at about the same time. And it just becomes Hazen's, William Babcock Hazen, known as the best hated man in the Army in the words of Ambrose Bierce. Brigade will deploy here along through here and facing off against Straw, and it just becomes an ugly slugfest. It just goes really bad for Straw's brigade, though, because he's really just left in a real hard situation. He's not basically being pulled back and forth. Basically, Cheatham cautions Straw to keep his men out of the cornfield and make no attempt to advance. However, they will try to advance. I never saw so many men fall on so small a space of ground, recalled one soldier, W.J. Worsham of the 19th Tennessee. Over this spot of ground, both armies had been driven, and each had left their dead and wounded to mark the ill-fated spot where the old 19th lost most of her men that day. Straw will quickly order his men back to the shelter of the wood line, but you just basically have this, and if you can kind of look behind us, you see those two large Union monuments. You see they're barely sticking up out of it, being a little monument. That's one of the Tennessee monuments. So they advance a little bit into the field, they'll be pushed back, and then it just becomes this firefight here, basically till Straw expends all of his ammunition. And meanwhile, of course, being fixed with the enemy in the front, he's got to deal with Jackson pushing forward and then being pushed back, so that's opening a gap on his flank to the north. And then further to the south, Marcus Wright, he doesn't run into anything. So he keeps moving forward and eventually decides he's going to try to turn the flank. Well, the Union line is then going to bend off to face him out this way. So the Union line is going to take this curve and bend back with a line running off to the west. And so as basically Wright's brigade is going to make a big wheel and come in to face them and begin pressing forward, trying to turn their flank. But here's the problem. All the Union troops all morning have been moving up the Lafayette Road, getting to a point, deploying, and moving forward. So what is going to happen now with Carter by this happening? He's going to begin turning the flank just as some Union troops are going to begin to advance upon his flank. And things are going to go very badly. Out in the woods on Carter's flank is going to be deployed his artillery battery. The Tennessee battery of W.W. Carnes. Now remember, if those of you who were with me earlier, you know how I've been saying that this battle is not suited for artillery, and I told the story about what happened to George Van Pelt, what happened to the 4th Indiana, and what happened to Burnham's battery up there. All that disaster. They're getting overrun. Well, you're going to have now basically the same thing is going to occur for Carnes' Tennessee battery. Captain W.W. Carnes' battery consisted of 2 6-pound smoothbores, 2 12-pound howitzers, supported Wright's brigade of Cheatham's division. The woods were so dense with undergrowth that it was almost impossible to keep the battery up with the infantry line. The enemy struck the enemy first, and as soon as Carnes could clear the ground of undergrowth, which he had to do with a detail of men armed with axes, he put his battery in position and opened on the advancing enemies with canister. In the heavy fighting which immediately followed, many of the men and horses were soon killed or disabled, and Carnes, seeing the impossibility of saving his guns if our line should be pressed back, sent his orderly to report the situation to the division commander and asked for help. Receiving reply to hold the ground as long as possible, Captain Carnes dismounted his officers and sergeants and put them and the gunners of the disabled horses at the guns to replace the cannoneers as they were being shot down, and giving the enemy double charges of canister at close range, drove back the line in his front. But as he had no support on his left, the Federals swung around the battery until it was almost surrounded. Finding it impossible to hold out longer, Carnes sent his few surviving men to the rear, and with his sergeant, fired his left gun a few times as rapidly as possible to keep back the fast closing lines. And then he and his sergeant mounted on their horses, which were tied nearby. The sergeant mounting first was riddled with bullets from a volley that was passed over the captain as he was in the act of mounting, wounding his horse. Making a dash for the now narrow opening to the rear, Captain Carnes escaped capture by being well mounted and a good rider. His horse was struck a number of times and could barely carry his rider till he reached the support coming from the rear and fell just after he passed through the advancing Confederate line. So a very narrow escape for Captain Carnes, but also again demonstrating why this is not a good battle for Confederate artillery. Of course, that's going to occur simultaneously here as along with the advance now of Preston Smith. Preston Smith's brigade is going to come up to replace Straw, but it's going to be somewhat the same situation. There's going to be a whole lot of firing going on, but the Union line is going to not be pushed back. One thing that will change, though, is that William Hazen, his brigade, has now expended its ammunition, and it's going to have to pull back to be replaced by the Mad Cossack, John Basil Turchin, another interesting character similar to Willich. His name would not necessarily indicate that he wasn't from around here, but we'll point out that that's not his birth-given name. His actual name is Ivan Turchinov, former officer in the Imperial Russian Guard. Turchin is a very colorful character within the Army of the Cumberland. Needless to say, because of his background, but also because his wife is present with him throughout almost all of this. Needless to say, when somebody got General Turchin as commander, it was a twofer. You also got Nadine, or Nadia Zada Turchinov, and she very colorful, highly educated lady, and she left a very colorful diary. A Russian who wrote a diary in French so she would not forget how to forget her French, and also a very candid lady who tended to be very critical of all the generals of the army except for her husband. But anyway, interesting little side note. But Turchin's brigade will come into action here. But basically, this fight here doesn't have the drama of a lot of changing thing. It's just a stand-up, knock-down, drag-out, brutal fight. That's going to the roar of this fight is just going to escalate, that it's going to draw attention from all quarters. So we're going to now move back down the road a little ways to talk about, I mentioned it just briefly earlier with Manny stopping or being driven back by Willich, and then stopping Willich, and we're going to go back and talk about where on that line where Maney did stop Willich. Yes, sir.
How's the size of the field now compared to what it was?
Smaller.
This is smaller.
Yeah, considerably. There would have been a cleared portion north of here, basically a stump field that had been cleared out, but the field itself, there would have been a narrow strip of trees, and then there would have been another field a little further to the south.
The actual Carnes battery, is that up off of the horse trail?
Yeah, but it'd be in direction-wise, it's going to be about through here. Dave, do you have any comments on the fighting down here you might want to add?
Every regiment has their own little story on this battlefield, and there's one that one Federal regiment that gets into a bit of difficulty here that has always struck me. Hazen's got 3 regiments that are veteran troops, but the 124th Ohio is new to this battle, new to battle period, and as they're running into this field, their colonel deploys Company B as skirmishers. The other regiments don't deploy their skirmishers. They go into battle line that confront Strahl's people. But the lieutenant, the green lieutenant, who is commanding the poor skirmishers of Company B, get caught out here in the field between the 2 lines for approximately 20 minutes before they manage to scramble back during a little bit of a lull in the fighting. You come across stories like that dozens of times. The lieutenant in command of Company B was convinced that most of his men that were shot out here were shot by his own regiment, with fire coming from his rear. One small mistake, or one small decision at a critical moment can have some pretty important repercussions. And you can go down almost every regiment here and find the same sort of human interest or tactical interest stuff.
Thank you, Dave. And for those that don't know, Dave Powell here is the author of the Maps of Chickamauga. What I consider to be one of the best studies of the battle, but he will also have a mammoth 3-volume history of Chickamauga coming out early next year. So anyone afterwards have questions about anything you want about the battle. But so anybody have any questions about the fight here though before we move on?
Did the line extend into the second field?
No, the Union line is going to basically come here and just wrap around basically where you see that corner there and bend back off to the west.
The original site of the Brock house was down there by that corner, and the line goes about that far and then runs back paralleling the road back that way. Confederates in that are in that far field and moving through that far field quite a bit.
Yeah, we'll be talking a little bit more about that bent back Union line in our 2:30 talk this afternoon about Stewart's attack. So I kind of ended things without going everything, because otherwise it'll be redundant this afternoon at 2:30. All right, then we'll move back toward out at the road and toward the intersection where we were at earlier. With down the center of the fight, with the line stabilizing down there. Up here, Willich pushes forward against Maney, and he drives Maney back to roughly the line here. You can see the monument here for the 32nd Indiana. The line will stretch on across. Maney's going to fall back to this distance here where they had originally jumped off for their attack. There is deployed the artillery of Cheatham's division. With their aid, they are able to slow and then stop Willich's advance. However, it's during this stage of the fighting, on the opposite side from here, that the color bearer of the 1st Tennessee is killed, Joe L. Campbell from Franklin, Tennessee. Of course, Franklin more famously known for a battle that will occur there a little later on. But the interesting story with Campbell is kind of one of those things. He wasn't supposed to be here. Campbell had been wounded at Stones River while carrying the colors of the regiment, and was still at home recovering from that. But he was here in Chattanooga visiting some buddies when all the movements began, and he picked up that flag again, but one arm in a sling and carrying the flag with his one good arm. And over there he will be killed as they stabilize their line. And it kind of starts a long process for his family, because for years his brother will come here looking for the body of his brother's body and never able to find it. So ultimately the family has to settle for just a marker to be erected over there near where the Preston Smith Monument is today, marking the spot where Joe Campbell was killed. And in the family cemetery, or plot at this in the cemetery up at the city cemetery in Franklin, the Campbell family cenotaph has Joe Campbell listed on it, although he's not buried at either one of these spots. We'll note that that same cemetery where the family plot is the same cemetery where Todd Carter, who was killed, the Carter House fame, is buried in that same cemetery. So just one little individual soldier who did not make it out of these woods alive 150 years ago this afternoon. But now, again, like our parts of the field, with the line being stabilized, Willich is not going to really push forward anymore. Johnson's division is going to hold in place. Palmer's division down in Brockfield still going to, face off against those front parts of Cheatham's division. However, events are going to move a little further to the side and south of there as the battle draws forward. And again, the roar of this battle was drawing many men to the guns that afternoon. So that'll be the subject of our program later on this afternoon. We are going to wrap up a little bit early, so I have time for questions if anyone has any. If not, we can give ourselves a little bit more of a break if somebody needs to grab some food, and we won't be so rushed getting to our jump-off point for our 2:30 program. Any questions? All right, folks. All right.